It's the
Yep.
same crap that's coming over the television right now from all the BBC, ABC, NBC, CBS. These guys are demonically possessed.
Welcome to the Mark Atwood Show, Adventures in a Cosmic Suit. It's currently Sunday, the 3rd of November, 2024. Only 2 days until the presidential election. I've been on a long road trip for 6 days. I say long, it's just a lot of driving all across the UK. Had some amazing experiences, family-related stuff, but then also I spent some time with Harry Rhodes. Harry Rhodes, regular viewers will know, is the inventor in the UK that makes the world's best methylene blue, and also a spiraling water vortex machine that massively increases negative ions in your blood. And what does that do? Well, it separates the blood from being clumped together, which is what happens when you are overexposed to radiation, EMFs, bad food, negative energy, that kind of thing. And then it separates them out and it makes your blood work. That's living water. And he does this with a copper coil, with a magnetic field, with shungite. And he's proven it time and time again with his microscope. He's coming here to the west of Ireland in about a month's time on the 1st of December to do a live talk where he'll be doing blood samples on the microscope, on the screen for you. If you'd like to come along, it will be next door to Live 5D Health, which is our healing clinic here in the west of Ireland. live5dhealth.com. If you've not heard of it, go and have a look and you'll see the vast array of amazing things that we have there to help people heal. And healing, as you know, regular viewers know, is a very deep, concerning subject for me, because that's really what I think the last 4 years has been about. It's been about us clearing ourselves, connecting to God, and then getting that divinity back into our bodies to help us through into the next stage of humanity's development. And that's why the election is very interesting, isn't it? I've been looking a lot at the prophecies of Kim Clements and Trey Smith's channel, and it's very interesting looking at those prophecies, but things are very different. I don't know about you, but energetically, Halloween was particularly interesting for me because I was on the Isle of Wight with Tom Numbers, my son, and Simeon, another friend of mine, and we were having lunch. And you may or may not have seen that while we were there, I happened to go out the back of the restaurant and bump into, at a chance of billions to one, a man called Jack Kidd, who was related to Lord Beaverbrook. Lord Beaverbrook is the man that owned the Daily Express during the Second World War. And he fell out with Churchill. And he started to expose people like Aleister Crowley. And apparently Crowley put a curse on him. And I spent the night there in the Isle of Wight, and it was very, very interesting. How does this relate to the healing? Well, I've intuitively said that the stuff that they put inside us, I mean, I'm talking about these things, but I'm also talking about particulates. I'm talking about all the poison in the paint in your house. I'm looking around at things that are not at the level they should be. Carpets, the formaldehyde in the mattresses, it's endless, the lengths they go to poison us. And one of the questions is why? Do they just want us dead? Or are they just putting us into a state where we can be easily accessed by non-physical entities that feed off our louche, our anxiety, our fear? Well, those non-physical entities are also known as demons. And I got an interesting text from a friend of mine a few months ago telling me about a man called Jerry Marzinsky, whose work is pretty amazing. He's a retired psychotherapist who has discovered, he's in his own words, he said that if you told me 30, 40 years ago demons are real, he'd have scoffed at you. But since through his work, working with deeply psychotic people with schizophrenia and things like that in his professional capacity, he came to the conclusion that demons are real. And I'm very pleased to say he's a guest here on the show today. Hello, Jerry.
Hello, glad to be with you.
Well, I'm very glad that you're here. When I came across you, I was like, oh, I have to speak to this guy.
I'm glad you did.
Yeah. Do you want to tell your story for the listeners from your point of view? Because I gave you an introduction there. Because I don't like reading biographies. I like to try and pull out the bits, but there may be salient points that you want to get across that I didn't manage to do.
Have you done the introduction, or should I go through my history? What would you like me
Yeah,
to do?
I've done an introduction, but I think the
Oh, okay.
viewers, yeah, if you want to tell your story from your point of view, that'd be great.
Well, yeah, I spent probably 45, 50 years on the front lines of mental health in various different um, institutions throughout the United States. And the whole time, virtually, I was studying the voices. I started off at one of the biggest psychiatric institutes in the United States, maybe the world. There were like 10,000 patients there when I got there. So, I was fascinated with mental illness, but they never said anything about what caused it um, in the DSM. It's just this description of all these hundreds of mental illnesses. But there wasn't anything in there about what caused it. So after graduate school, when I went to work for this big giant hospital, it was the size of a small town, psychiatric institute. I started seeing that there were some anomalies that didn't agree with what I was taught. And one of the first ones was that the voices were hallucinations, and that's not what I saw. So when I started watching these schizophrenic patients at the hospital, I was thinking hallucinations. It would be like word cabbage, word salad. It wouldn't make any sense. That's not what I saw. These guys were carrying on full bore, coherent conversations with something I couldn't see. It looked like they were talking to themselves, but they were actually arguing with some of these things. They were carrying on a vivid argument with them. One lady the voices were telling her to leave the hospital grounds. She was arguing with them that she didn't want to leave the hospital grounds. And they were telling her, well, no, you need to leave the hospital grounds. She's arguing with them as she's walking off the grounds. So I saw that time after time. They weren't word salad. They were speaking to these people in, full, coherent, logical sentences. Now I couldn't hear what they were saying. So it was like listening to one side of a telephone conversation. You can hear what the person, has the phone to their head. You can hear that, but you can't hear the answer coming in. So I was surprised that they weren't, word salad, because when they talked about hallucinations, hallucinations are random. They're all over the place. So that's what I thought they were, but that's not what I saw. So that was one of the first things that, kind of took me back. Second thing was, all through college and graduate school, they're saying that schizophrenia, mental illness, is caused by a chemical imbalance of the brain. Right.
Mm-hmm.
So I was watching what was going on with the psychiatrists at this huge state hospital, and never did I see them take any kind of baseline with regard to what chemicals in the brain were out of balance or by how much. Never did that happen. So I started asking them about it. I said, well, how do you know what the baseline is? How do you know what chemicals are out of balance or by how much if you're not taking any kind of baseline? I found out they don't have anything to measure a baseline. Nothing exists.
Mm-hmm.
They don't even know what the chemical balance of the brain should be. So it's like, what's this massive lie that they're teaching in the universities, which had been taken over in the 1930s by the I think it was the Rockefellers. With their, what was it, some report that they paid for, and they paid off Congress to pass this law that medical universities could not graduate students who did not take a pharmacological curriculum.
Yeah.
So here they were basing everything around these drugs. You know,
That
everything
was the
else was made illegal.
that was the Flexner report, I
The
think,
Flexner report, right?
and that's the report that changed everything.
That's the
Not just
report that. Yep, they
yeah,
made
not
they made everything else in the U.S. illegal. You know, naturopathy, Tesla's violet ray, acupuncture, everything else was made illegal. And
I've
any
got one.
doctor,
I've got one of those here.
yeah, I got two of them here.
They're fantastic, aren't they?
Yeah, they are.
Because there were
They were.
millions of them. They were everywhere, weren't
Hmm.
they? And then
Hmm.
they just went underground. I think mine's about 100 years old.
Well, you probably got one of the better ones then.
I'm just wondering where I put it. Oh, that's great. I mean, amazing you've got one of those as well. Because as you were speaking, I was going to ask you. The first question that pops into my head is: at what point did you realize actually the people running what they're teaching in universities are either demonically possessed or demons themselves? Because that is the conclusion that I've come to. Have I jumped ahead too quickly?
Well, you know what? I don't think they know any better. Yeah, because going through graduate school, very few of these professors spend a lot of time have spent a lot of time on the real front lines of mental illness. They would work in student counseling centers or maybe a mental health center, but they they weren't on the front lines. They weren't in the psychiatric hospitals. They weren't in the state hospitals. Very few of them spent time in the mental health centers. So I think they just bought the crap that they were told, like I did. When I got out, it was like, oh yeah, it's due to a chemical imbalance to the brain, and that's what they're teaching. That's what they're still teaching. So I asked one of the psychiatrists one day. I said, "Well, how do you know what's out of balance or by how much if you don't have any tests? You don't have any lab tests. You don't have any X-rays, EKG, nothing. There was no um, objective test." They said, "Oh, we just listen to what the drug salesmen tell us. The
That
drug
sounds,
the drug companies have done all the research." And I just
that
went,
sounds
"What?
very. That
What?
sounds so familiar, doesn't it?
Oh, I couldn't friggin' believe it. Oh, you just give this drug for this particular diagnosis. You give this drug for another diagnosis. There was no test. There was no objective test. There still is no objective test for any of the, what is it, 297 mental illnesses they have in the DSM today. There's no objective test. There's
Could,
no way to measure them.
could you just explain what the DSM is for the viewers and for me, please?
Well, the DSM is the psychiatric Bible.
Okay.
You know, it started off with it's called the Psychiatry's Diagnostic and Statistic Manual of Mental Health Disorders, and it's a complete work of fiction. It's all made up.
So, so hang on. How long had you been practicing as a psychiatrist when you came to the conclusion there was something else going on?
Well, I'm not a psychiatrist.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, so uh, when it was probably two
Psychotherapist. Sorry, that's
yeah
why it's psychiatrist.
2 or 3 years after I was working in the big state hospital. You know, it was like things didn't make sense. Like none of the people there were the least bit interested. I mean, even though you could tell that the voices were behind a lot of the um, abhorrent behavior that these schizophrenics were doing, none of the staff, and there were hundreds and hundreds of them there, were the least bit interested in finding out what these voices were telling these people. You know? And the patients, of course, they had no interest in telling any of the staff anything about them, because every time they opened their mouths, they would get, another slug of these horrible drugs. So there is no benefit to schizophrenics talking about their voices. They scare away their friends. Their friends go, "You're demonically possessed." People start avoiding them. They think they're weird. They tell their parents or relatives. They get drugged into a psychiatrist's office. They come out of the psychiatrist's office drugged in a semi-zombie type form with the hopeless message that there is no cure. You got to take these toxic drugs for the rest of your life.
Well, this happened to a friend of mine. He was having a schizophrenic incident, I think it was called, and then they basically chased him down, captured him, and then drugged him. And I don't know if they did the thing on the head with the electricity, but he was
the ECT.
Yeah, he was never the same, and it was, knowing him was always very interesting because he was on like a razor's edge. And even then, which is only 7 or 8 years ago, I knew that he had a problem with demons, and I was trying to explain this to him. But they had such a hold on him, and they had a hold on me too. I mean, I'm of the opinion that the whole human race has been demonically possessed for a very long time, and it's only really in recent years, and thanks to people like you bringing it to people's attention, that people are actually starting to take it seriously. Because I read one of your, I think it was on your website, where the people just don't. They think it's some sort of medieval thing, and it's just nonsense from uneducated people. But I know differently through my own personal life experiences. But I kept it suppressed for years and years. I didn't talk about it at all because I thought you just sound like a lunatic.
Well, I didn't either because nobody believed you.
Yeah.
There was nobody I could talk to. For years, the only people I could talk to who understood what's going on were the schizophrenics themselves. I could talk to them about this stuff, but I couldn't talk to any of my colleagues. I couldn't even talk to my wife because she'd like, oh, you shouldn't be poking through the heads of these criminally insane people in the first place. Stop doing that. And I'm like, well, I couldn't. I mean, it was like it was driving me crazy because I couldn't figure out for decades what was going on. The whole 7 years I worked at the state hospital, I learned maybe a handful of things. And one of the things was how to talk to schizophrenics, where they will tell you something because they're very guarded. They know what happens if they speak about the voices, and the voices actually tell them, if you start talking to people about us, they will think you're crazy, they will lock you up, and they'll fill you full of drugs. And that's exactly what happens.
So when you started realizing that they were talking to somebody that was invisible, did you start trying to record that half of the conversation to see if there was any thread?
No, you couldn't record anything at the hospital or in the prison. When I was working at the state hospital, I did start asking patients, what are these things telling you? And patterns started emerging.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the first patterns that emerged was that they're consistently negative. They don't say anything good. It's like you're rotten, you're no good, you're stupid, you're ugly, nobody likes you, you're worthless, you're not good enough. I mean, all this garbage. It's all negative.
Yeah.
So my first thought was, what holds them on this consistently negative pattern? They don't go positive at all. It's consistent. So what holds them on that negative pattern? Why do they just stay negative? How come they're not random like regular hallucinations? That was my first question. And that didn't make sense because, the psychiatric mafia calls them auditory hallucinations. Hallucinations are all over the place. I mean, I've worked in hospitals long enough to see they're all over the place. There's no pattern to them. They're positive, they're negative, they're all over the place. There's no pattern. When these things started running patterns, that got my attention. So they were consistently negative, and I talked to hundreds of schizophrenics. They all said the same thing. These things are rotten. They don't say anything good. They put you down. They're derogatory. They're demeaning. They're just awful. Right? So that was the first pattern I saw, and I went, well, okay, something's off here. If they're running patterns, they can't be hallucinations. Psychiatry and the academics have done no research into this at all. What happened was in the 1980s, the landmark antidepressant Prozac came out, and the Eli Lilly, the company who produced that, came up with this lie that there was a chemical imbalance in the brain of these people, and that their drug somehow balanced things out so these people weren't quite as depressed. They knew it was a lie at the time. They made it up. And they advanced that chemical imbalance theory as a marketing scheme to sell their new drug Prozac. You know, there was no demonstrable evidence showing that depressed patients had any chemical imbalance in their brain. Eli Lilly ran with it long before before long. Psychiatrists and the academic institutions started pushing that also. You know? And the same goes for antipsychotic drugs. There is no evidence of a chemical imbalance in the brain of schizophrenics. And now at this point, it's disproven beyond a shadow of a doubt. They're still pushing it. They're still teaching this in the universities. It's a
Well,
complete lie.
it is part of the narrative because I remember, and again, I think the people that created things like Prozac are demons because what I was trying to say at the beginning of the show is that the stuff that comes within ourselves, I think that helps them latch onto us. But what that brought to mind is a book that came out in '94 called Prozac Nation, and which is even here when you read this description, it says the book describes the author's experience with atypical depression, her own character failings, and how she managed to live through difficult periods. And I remember that book when it came out. And that is a classic way of these things being described in culture, because they use culture to reinforce these ideas, in my opinion. And, even where it says her own character failings being this, this is why so many Americans are still on Prozac now, aren't they?
Yeah, they're still taking it. They still believe it. And it doesn't cure. None of these psychiatric drugs cure anything.
No.
They don't fix anything. They just tamp down symptoms.
Yeah.
So it's they got a perfect. They're making 14.7 billion, not million, $1 billion a year selling these antipsychotic drugs, and another 14 point something selling antidepressants. They cure absolutely nothing. Matter of fact, these antipsychotic drugs with long-term use, they shrink your brain. They cause neurological damage, permanent neurological damage. And what they did at the state hospital where I was working, when the symptoms of neurological damage started showing up, the shaking, the tongue darting, the shuffling walk, they didn't just cut down the amount of antipsychotic drug they're using. They put what they call cogentin on top of it to mask the effects that the damage these drugs were causing were tamped down, so that the patient didn't feel it, but their nervous system was still being rotted out.
So when you got to the point when you realized there was a pattern here, when did you get to the conclusion that these might be demons or entities or something? Did you have a religious background? Did you have any experiences yourself of this as a child? Because on your description, you say, if you told me the demons were real, I'd have laughed at you. But so it must have been quite a journey for you to get to that conclusion.
Well, it was like I didn't want to believe in demons. I didn't want to believe these people were possessed by stuff. I didn't want to. And the evidence kept piling up and piling up and piling up. I think anybody else would have went long ago, long before I did, that something's going on here. The second pattern I saw at the state hospital, that these voices were anti-religious. It's like, why would a hallucination be anti-religious? They consistently didn't want these people reading the Bible. They didn't want them going to church. They didn't want them praying. They didn't want them saying the name of Jesus or God. Or they would actually drive them out of the churches sometime. And there were three classifications. I started asking all the clients I had on my caseload and the ones that came in, like, what happens when you go to church? It turned out that when the voices are very weak, they would shut up in the church. If they were moderately strong, they would get louder and drown out the preacher so the patient couldn't hear what he was saying. If they were very strong, they would actually drive the person out of the church. They would get up and they would run out of the church.
Mm-hmm.
And this is hundreds of schizophrenics. I talked to them. They're all telling me the same story. So why would a hallucination be anti-religious?
Yeah, you can't come to any other conclusion, really, can you?
It, and it just kept going, and now we have 23 of them. You can see them on my website at jerrymarzinsky.com under articles. So if they're running patterns, they can't be hallucinations. Now, psychiatry, the big pharma, they haven't studied the voices at all. They just go, oh, they're hallucinations. Why should we study a hallucination? They're like the Egyptian priests of old. We hereby pronounce that they're hallucinations, so you better believe it. That's bull crap. It's total bull crap.
So where did this take you, Jerry? Because once you came to that conclusion, presumably speaking out about this would have got you shunned in your profession. Is that what happened?
Well, I had to be very careful. You know, there was nobody I could talk to. And while I was at the state hospital, I learned a handful of things about the voices in schizophrenia. Um, the third thing I learned was that they were parasites. These people, after the voices attacked them, they had no energy left. And I'd ask them, you know, do you feel your energy gone after the voices attack? And they go, well, yeah. And I'd say, well, where do you think it went? And they go, well, I don't know. They were being blocked from seeing that. They didn't even notice it until I brought it up. And I would tell them, well, you've been attacked by these things thousands of times. And every time you were attacked, your energy level was down to zero. Where do you think your energy went? Well, I never thought about it. Well, I don't know. They were being blocked. And I'd tell them, I said, if you stuck your hand in a fire 1,000 times and each time you got burned, what's burning you? They had no trouble saying, well, the fire. And I'd say, well, if you were attacked by the voices 1,000 times and every time you were attacked, you didn't have any energy left, where'd your energy go? Well, most of them would still say, oh, I don't know. Some of them would go, the voices took it? Like it would just dawned on them because they were just feeling bad.
Yeah.
So it was just buried in the feeling bad. Okay? So those were the three patterns I saw at the state hospital. And then I started asking them, what were the voices telling you? One of them, his voices got upset and got him to go tell a psychiatrist that I was asking him questions about his voices. Next morning, I got pulled up in that psychiatrist's office on the red carpet. He went, don't you be asking these patients about their voices. What you're doing is reinforcing their hallucinations and you're making them worse. So he gave me a warning. He said, you better stop this right now. And I'm thinking in the back of my head, you are so full of crap, your eyes are floating. But I couldn't say anything because they're so freaking arrogant. They have all the power.
Yeah.
So I had to be a lot more careful, working at the state hospital. So because psychiatrists were being attacked by schizophrenics at a rate equal to that of attendants that were on the wards with these people 24 hours a day. And I'm going, they're only spending 20 minutes a month with these people. What are they saying to these guys in 20 minutes that is getting them attacked? It didn't make any sense to me. They were always being assaulted, especially by schizophrenics, and it was always around. Back then, we didn't have cell phones. It was at the hospital cafeteria where the, what do they call it, the grapevine was.
Yeah.
And these guys were always getting popped, and I'm like, what's going on? Why are they getting beat up more than anybody else? I mean, it was a horrendous rate. So I think they were afraid, and they were going, don't do anything to upset the schizophrenics. It was like an unwritten rule of the state hospital there. And I didn't understand what was going on until the 7th year when we were about to discharge one girl who went off her meds. So we had a policy, if they go off 3 times when the meds are being handed to them, I mean, they don't have to go anywhere to get them. If they go off the meds, then they're not going to stay on the meds when they get out. And we're probably wasting our time with them. So this girl was doing good in she was in a hairdressing class, and she went off for the 3rd time, and we were about to discharge her. We notified the mother. The mother called me, and she was just frantic. She goes, you can't discharge her. I can't deal with it. I'll come up and we'll find out why she went off her meds. And I said, well, I felt bad for her. I said, okay, come on up and we'll talk to her. And So she came up on a Friday afternoon, and both of us are asking this girl, why did you quit your meds? You know what happens when you quit your meds. You quit your meds a bunch of times before and you went crazy. You went psychotic. Why did you do it again? You knew you were going to be discharged if you did it a third time. And she goes, You won't believe me. I told her. I said, try me. I've heard some and seen some weird stuff since I've been here. I don't think anything you tell me is going to, weird me out. And she said, the voices told me that the psychiatrist was poisoning me, you know, and they pointed to the symptoms of the antipsychotic drugs as the effects of being poisoned. So in effect, it was true. These drugs are toxic. She was being poisoned, and the voices were telling him, look at these side effects. You are being poisoned. And I have a few of them here from, this is Geodon. It's one of the antipsychotic drugs they were using. It causes skin rash, a feeling of restlessness with inability to sit still, constipation, dizziness, drowsiness, excessive saliva production, extrapyramidal disease, which is just uncontrolled movements, generalized weakness, headache, nausea, weight gain, chest pain, fast heartbeat, uh, low potassium in the blood, you know, and that's just the tip of the iceberg. You know? So here were the voices telling these patients that the psychiatrist was poisoning them, and that explained why they were being beat up at such a horrendous rate. And on the streets, you'll read where, the newspaper articles where these schizophrenics are actually murdering psychiatrists. So I think they're a little bit weirded out by schizophrenics. They don't want to go digging in their heads. Um, so where I learned the most was when I took a job in the psychology department of a large state prison. Okay, there now I got two warnings by psychiatrists when I was working at the state hospital not to be asking the schizophrenics about their voices. So not only were they not interested, they were stopping everybody else from looking into it.
Yeah.
Okay? When I got hired at the state prison, you know, they're set up to deal with violence. They're ready for it. So it's like if one of the prisoners went to the warden and said, "Oh, the psych is asking me about the voices in my head and I don't like it," the warden would go, "Get out of my face. Go play in the traffic or something. Get out of here." It, it wouldn't even approach the level of where any action would be taken.
Yeah.
So what I had around me the entire time when I was at the prison was a group of 10 to maybe 17 psychotic inmates, schizophrenics, who were hearing voices, who agreed to tell me in real time what those voices were telling them while we were in session. Okay?
Hmm.
So I had real time access, and I could even carry on conversations with the voices through the patient. You know, and here they were, they're talking in complete sentences. It wasn't dribble. They didn't like me very much. They were always telling the patient, "Don't go there. Don't talk to him. Don't tell him anything. He already knows too much." Was one of the things that they kept telling these guys. He already knows too much. Shut up. Don't tell him anymore. You know? But these guys didn't have anybody who would listen to them in psychiatry or psychology.
Yeah.
To find somebody in the psychology department who would actually listen to what they had to say was a rarity. You know, so they would tell me about the voices. So what I started doing was going, well, okay, these voices are running more and more patterns started emerging, as I was working with these guys. So I started thinking, okay, what happens if I start messing with those patterns? What if I start throwing monkey wrenches in those patterns? What would happen? And even then, I wasn't convinced that these things were demons or entities. I was still thinking, well, maybe it's some figment of their subconscious mind or something like that. I didn't want to think that they were entities.
Mm.
So I started throwing monkey wrenches in, like, do this and come back a week later, tell me what happened. Right? So that went on for years. And they started coming back one at a time saying, the voices don't like what you're doing. They don't want us coming here. They raise hell every time we go to come to your office. They raise hell, tell us not to go there. You're wasting your time. They don't want us coming here. And I went, well, that's interesting. They don't like what I'm doing. So that was the first thing that appeared. And it's like, oh, that's odd for a hallucination. Uh, so, I kept it up. And then one guy, after we had a session one day, he turns around in my doorway and he says, "You know what you're doing is dangerous, don't you?" And I just looked at him. I had never thought about it. It's like, well, they're stuck in your head. They're not in my head. I can't see them. I can't feel them. Well, it's your problem. But I remembered that. It
Yeah.
was like a warning. I stuck it in the back of my mind and just kind of sat on it. Next thing that happened is one of the patients I was working with somehow got into the medical unit without a pass. He knocks on my door and he says, and I've been working with him for about 6 months. He knocks on my door. I open the door and I'm like, "How'd you get in here without a pass?" And he goes, "The voices want to talk to you."
Ooh.
And I'm like, "They want to talk to me personally?" That
Yeah.
hadn't happened ever before. So in the 15, 20 years I've been working with schizophrenics, that had never happened. They never spoke to me directly. It was always the patient was the translator. So what I would tell them, "Well, tell your voices this," and they would say, "Well, the voices are saying this," and it always went through the patient. It was never a direct contact. Yeah. This was a direct contact.
Mm.
So I'm like, I was kind of a little bit weirded out, but I was curious. I'm like,
Mm.
"Well, where's this going to go?" So I brought him in. He sat down. We closed the door, and I said, "Well, what do they have to say?" And these words came out of his mouth: "You have no right to interfere with
Yeah.
our way of life."
Yeah.
And my head just went boom.
Yeah.
They are demons. They are entities. Our way of life. It wasn't singular. It was plural. Our way of life.
It's like they'd had a meeting.
Yeah. Yeah. And my head just exploded. That was the moment. And there was probably 15 years before that where I was denying that these things were entities. That was the moment where my denial system, which was already in tatters, it was held together with duct tape and string,
Yeah.
because all this evidence kept popping up. That collapsed it. But there was nobody I could talk to except the inmate himself.
Yeah.
I couldn't tell my colleagues. I couldn't tell my wife. There was nobody I could talk to who wouldn't think I was a lunatic if I brought that up. So I just had to keep it to myself. And, it was getting stranger and stranger and stranger. So the next thing that happened, I kept working with this guy. This was the same guy. And let me see, what was the next thing that happened? I think it was the crackling thing, where I was reading a book by Miguel Ruiz, who's a South American shaman, and he was talking about these entities who were parasites. Because I knew by then the voices were parasites. They were milking these guys. Well, every single one of them was either constantly drained, or if they had any energy, it was gone after the voices attacked them. So here was Miguel Ruiz talking about that same energy vampire thing that these things had. So I brought that book into the prison, and I called in this guy who the voices had warned me. You have no business, messing with us. And I started reading him the paragraph in my office, and he got real weird looking. His eyes just kind of popped open. They would look like a zombie. He was just sitting there. He didn't move. Didn't do anything. Once I hit the part where these things were parasitic entities, he just weirded out. He didn't say anything. He just was staring at me like a zombie. And I went, he's going to attack. And I pushed my chair against the wall just in case he came at me. And I figured, well, at least I can kick him back. Because what they did is they just put female officers in the medical department. They wouldn't have been of any help.
Are you spiritually protected? Are you wearing the armor of God? Are you prepared against the principalities of darkness that currently wreak havoc in our world? Spiritual warfare is a very real thing. Weapons of Mass Protection is the explosive and practical 5-star best-selling book from authors Abby Wynn and Mark Atwood, who both agree that humanity is in the midst of the biggest spiritual awakening in human history. If you feel like things ain't what they seem, if you feel you are under attack, get your weapons ready now. Weapons of Mass Protection. Practical tools for spiritual warfare. Out now.
So I'm looking at him. He's weirding me out. My chair's against the wall. And then this loud electrical crackle exploded right behind my head on the wall. And I'm like, what the hell is that? And I'm looking around like, what's causing this? And he's still staring at me like a zombie. And then this thing started moving. It sounded exactly like an arc welder. The crackling from an arc welder. It's like crack, 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 crack. And it's moving from behind my head over to the wall on my right-hand side. And I look and I don't see anything. I don't smell anything. But it's moving. I hear it. And then it starts going at a 45-degree angle up the right-hand wall up toward the ceiling. And I'm looking at this guy. I said, do you hear this? You hear that? And he just kept staring at me just with this blank stare, like a zombie stare, weirded me out.
Yeah.
And it's like crack, 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 all the way up the wall. And I'm kind of splitting my attention between him and the crackling because I didn't know what he was going to do. Is he going to attack or what? He's weirding me out. And then this thing is happening. And I'm like, what in the blazes is going on? And I'm tracking this thing as it goes. I can track it by the sound, but I still couldn't see anything. I couldn't smell anything. I didn't feel anything. So it starts moving across the ceiling over his head fairly slowly. This wasn't like a short-term little blurb. This went on for 25, 30 seconds. And I'm tracking this thing. I'm like, what the hell is going on? And then it starts coming down the wall on the left-hand side. And I'm watching him, and he's just sitting there with that zombie stare, weirding me out. And then it comes down the wall, and it jumps into this Rubbermaid trash can by my left leg. And I look down in there, there's nothing there. It's crackling in there, but there's nothing there. The inmate clerk had cleaned it out the night before. There was nothing there. It's totally empty. There's just this crackling sound coming out of there.
Mm-hmm.
And then boom, just like that, it stops. And I look at him, and he slowly gets up and he goes, I gotta leave. And, and I'm like, yeah, get the hell out of here. Go. Just go.
Yes, please.
And he gets up and he shuffles down the hallway. And it was just a massive relief. And after he leaves, I get up and I start examining the walls. Are there any burnt marks on there? It's like I started feeling like I'm going nuts. I'm going crazy. This, whatever it is spreading to me. And I didn't see any burn marks. I didn't see anything. So I went out in the hallway. I look out in the hallway, and the doctor's not in. The nurses aren't in. All their offices are closed and locked. There's nothing out there that could have accounted for that sound. So I'm completely boom. It was like a psychological shock. I couldn't function. It was like, what the hell just happened?
Yeah.
And I couldn't see anybody. I couldn't talk to anybody. There was nobody I could confide in. There was nobody I could talk to. And I'm like, what is going on? Am I losing my mind? And so I had to keep that to myself. I could tell another one of the psych people that they think I was losing my mind. So it was about, that's when I knew these things there was something off with these things. There was something going on that I didn't understand. And I didn't know where this was going. It was like a portal had opened up. I'd stepped in there. I'd seen some things that once you see it, you can't not unsee it. But I had no cognitive map of where this went or what was in there or what could happen. And I took consolation up to the point of these cracklings that they couldn't affect physical reality. That's where it really weirded me out, because they were now affecting physical reality. They were causing sound waves from this electrical shock noise. So there was another thing. It's like, what are you getting into? Where are you going? Where's
Yeah.
this? Where's it going to take you? You don't have any cognitive map. Nobody else has been here before. You know, it's like I was just in shock. You know, and stayed that way for probably a couple of days, a few days.
Yeah.
And I never did call that guy back. It was probably 3 months before I called him back in. I didn't want to see him again.
No.
So finally, I got the guts to call him back in, and he shows up at my door, and I'm like not knowing what to expect, and he looks normal again. The zombie thing was gone, and I told him, I said, I'm surprised you look so good. And he goes, well, I've been doing what you told me to. I haven't got rid of the voices, but I've got them at a Mexican standoff. They haven't gotten any worse. They haven't gotten any better, but they haven't gotten any worse.
What did you told him to do?
Oh, there's a number of things that you can do, you know, to kind of fight them. All these things that I was doing, throwing the monkey wrenches in there. You know, 23rd Psalm. They hate the 23rd Psalm. They absolutely hate it. One patient told me that repeating the 23rd Psalm has the effect on them of being like worms thrown on a hot frying pan. They hate Psalm 91. They hate being laughed at or mocked. I mean, there's a whole series of things you can do to fight back against them. But to finish up this story, he comes back in, and I said, "You look good, you know." And after some small talk, I said, do you remember the last time you were in the office here? He goes, yeah. I said, did you hear that crackling? He said, yeah, I heard it, but I'm surprised that you did, meaning me. He was surprised that I heard it. Okay. So I asked him, I said, what in the blazes was that? And he said, that was them. I said, them who? The voices? He said, yeah, that was the voices. So here I am again, like, okay. here's the confirmation that was them. And I asked him, well, what in the hell were they doing? He said they were trying to scare you off. And I
Mhm.
said they did a damn good job of it, you know. And I asked him, I said, you looked really weird when you walked out of my office that day. I said, what were the voices telling you as you were leaving the office? He said they were telling me to go to get a shank and stick it in your gut, which the shank is a homemade prison knife.
Yeah.
Right? And I'm thinking, oh, I've worked with him for 6 months. He wouldn't do that. I mean, I know him better than, you know, most inmates on the yard. We always got along great. He was doing what I told him to. He was getting better, or at least holding these things off, you know. And I didn't think he would do anything like that. So I asked him, I said, why didn't you do it? He said, I couldn't find one and nobody would give me one.
Whoa.
Yeah. So it's like, I'm like, where is this going? You know,
Mm.
this isn't safe. But it was like I couldn't stop. You know,
How could you?
I couldn't stop. You know, but it was like in the back of my mind is where's this going?
Yeah.
You know, and then another weird thing started happening. Some of these long-term prisoners who were psychotic started recovering, fully recovering. The voices were gone. You know? And then they went off their meds. They would go see the psychiatrist and they'd go, I don't need the meds anymore. You know, and the psychiatrist was going, they don't believe that. You know, it's like, well, your voices are just gone. You better stay on the meds. That's what's keeping them away. And they go, no. I stopped taking them a while back. They're gone.
Mm-hmm.
And psychiatrist would ask him, well, what happened? Well, Jerry did something. Da, 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 da. So it got back to the chief psychologist that these guys
Mhm.
were recovering. And I thought he'd be happy about that, you know, because they're saving on medicine. You know,
No.
they're you know, these
Yeah.
guys are going to go out. They're going to live a normal life. They're not going to be psychotic anymore. No, that guy started pacing around like a freaking demon. When he found out these
Well,
people were recovering, he got very upset. And I'm like, why are they upset? You know, so
mhm.
then he started an investigation, right? All these prisoners who stopped taking their medications because the voices were
Yo.
gone, right? They started pulling them in and asking them, what's he doing? What's he doing in there? Because sometimes I'd spend 2-3 hours with him at a time, and there were the rest of the psych staff couldn't deal with him for more than 20 minutes. They didn't know what was going on. They had no idea what to do with him. So they go, "You taking your meds?" "Yeah, I'm taking my meds." "Okay, see you next month," kind of thing. But
Yeah.
what was so interesting is that all the schizophrenics who recovered protected me. They didn't tell them anything, because they knew what would happen. And then one guy even made it worse.
Yeah.
He completely recovered. The psychologist investigator who was sent down to investigate him asked him, "What's Jerry doing in there?" And he said, "He's helping us, not like you, asshole." I'm like, "Oh my God, he could have went all day without saying that." And this psychologist went, "Well, we had a valid MMPI." He said, "We had a valid MMPI on you when you got into prison, and it showed conclusively that you were psychotic. Would you mind taking another one?" So the prisoner said, "No, no problem at all. I'll take another one." So he took it again. They scored it up. It was another valid profile, and it showed no elevation on the psychosis scale. Yeah. So it confirmed what they were worried about. And this didn't make them any happier. They got more and more frantic. They started doing more and more investigations. They started asking all these. They
Yeah.
transferred me off one unit. They put me on a Spanish-speaking unit where I really couldn't work with these guys because my command of Spanish isn't that good. So here they were doing everything they could to stop me from helping these guys. It,
Yeah.
it, it blew my mind. But I knew beyond the shadow of a
You're
doubt.
putting them out of business.
They were afraid. They were actually afraid. You'd see them pacing around. It was like something was wrong. They called me up in front of the. They did a, what do you call it?
A review.
Well, it was kind of like a review where they called me up in front of the medical director for the prison, for that entire prison. And it was really weird because all these Christians came out and said, "Okay, don't talk to them, don't tell them anything you don't have to," because I'd never been before. What do they call it? It's not an insurrection. It's like the things they used to do in England when they were, sentencing witches. What do they call those things?
Trials.
Well, it wasn't quite a trial. It was a, it was going to be a kangaroo court type thing.
There'll be people shouting at the screen now with the word, but yeah, I can imagine. Yeah. Just to go back a little bit, just for the viewers, you mentioned about 20 minutes ago the 23 types that you got on your website, which is jerrymarzinsky.com. Marzinsky. I'll put a link below the video for everybody to go and get to this. What was that article with the 23 types you mentioned?
Yeah,
Jerry?
23 patterns. So if you go to my website at jerrymarzinsky.com, then go to articles, and then pull it up. There's the patterns there. Okay. Now there's 23 patterns, and what psychiatry is doing, these entities are energetic. They're not physical entities. They operate in a universe that there is no time, there's no matter, there's no physical attributes to that. So it should be called the patterns the voices run somewhere.
Ah, got it.
Okay, so these entities are energetic entities. They're not physical. So what psychiatry is doing is like if you got a big strong magnet, okay, you have that magnetic field. You can't see it, you can't hear it, you can't touch it, you can't taste it. From all physical aspects, it doesn't exist. Right? So these patterns are like the operational definition of what these voices are. Okay, they're the energetic equivalent of what they are. Okay? So what psychiatry is doing, they're taking a physical medicine and like dumping it onto a magnetic field and thinking that that medicine is going to somehow affect these entities that are energetic in nature.
Yeah.
It doesn't. All they're doing is drugging the brain.
Yeah.
The reason those medicines work at all is because these entities are negative. They want to do and create all the turmoil, guilt, shame, all any negative emotion they can generate, because that's what they feed off of. That's their loosh.
Yeah.
So if they can keep these people paranoid and shamed and guilty and fearful, they're feeding off of that negative emotion. That's their food. That's why they're constantly saying negative things to them, like you're no good, you're worthless, you're stupid, nobody likes you.
Which is what you hear everybody say all the
Yeah.
time about themselves. And this has been part of my work over the years, is just like getting that. I used to call it programming, but it's really actually a live living thing that's doing it. But I've said for years as well, there's no 3D answers to 5D questions. This is why you can't fix, like you said, you can't fix an energetic problem with something chemical. But I just want to ask you, because you brought it up, how did you find out that they don't like Psalm 91, for example, and did you find out why?
Well, I just assumed it was one of the data points that I had on the trip. It was like whatever they are, they don't like Psalm 91, so they're anti-religious. It didn't dawn on me at that point. I learned that while I was still working at the state hospital.
Are
And
they
one day,
anti-religious, or are they just against God?
well, they're against God. They're against Jesus. They're against the Muslims' religion. They're um,
Because that's interesting. Because you're mentioning that, I'll bring this up. I did live in Morocco for 4 years, and while I was there, that's when I learned about the jinn.
yes,
And they have a completely different attitude in their society about these invisible entities than we
right,
do in the Western world,
right.
because they
They
literally live with them. They know
yes,
when
they
they
know
do.
what they are. They
Yeah,
have prayers against them. They are well aware of them, and they
yeah,
have been for thousands of years probably. But
yeah.
here in Christian religion, even though 23 times Jesus cast these demons out of people, you know,
23. You say
23. I
23
think it
again.
was 23 times, I believe it was.
That's interesting, because the
Yeah,
numbers come up twice.
23rd Psalm. Yeah. So
Exactly.
the Christians are kind of going, oh yeah, there's they might be around, but we think it's a fairy tale. It's these ancient tales from 2,000 years ago. I mean, they don't take them seriously, you know. And I just heard recently that the DSM, these psychiatrists who put these diagnoses in, have added a new psychiatric diagnosis for people who hear voices. It's not, it was some kind of special disorder. I haven't seen it yet because I haven't seen the new DSM. So here it goes again. It's a disorder. It's another psychiatric disorder. They want people. They have no interest in curing people. They've
No,
defunded research into schizophrenia down to a pittance here in the United States. They they have no interest in finding a cure. They have interest in selling toxic medications over and over and over again for the whole life of these people until they die. That's what they want. They don't want a cure. They don't want anybody looking into a cure. They don't want the truth out. You saw what they did to me at the state hospital. No, don't even ask questions about the voices.
no, exactly. And it's the same as questioning the ingredients in vaccines, for example. That they
Yeah.
just shut down. They don't want to know. I mean, I've met a number of doctors that have stood up against that, and I asked one of them. I said, "Did you never get taught to read the ingredients of things you're injecting into people?" And he said, "No."
Yeah.
This is just what. But they've done a very good job, and I think it's to do with the entities as well. It's interesting how you said earlier that the entities would tell them not to do things, or it depends how powerful the voice was, and make them forget things, or and that is something that they have the ability to do. And I see it all the time, just anecdotally every day, even down to kids not reading the ingredients on the horrible drink that they're drinking on a can.
Yeah.
And I pointed out to them, and they go and read it like it's the first time anybody's ever told them. And I'm like, have you never read the ingredients? And they're like, no.
Yeah, I've seen that with psychiatrists too. They very seldom tell the patient what the awful side effects of these drugs will be. They may mention a few of the ones that are very obvious, like, oh, you're going to have blurred vision, or your mouth is going to get dry, or you're going to feel drugged up for a couple of weeks until you get used to this. But as far as the neuroleptic damage, the neurological damage these things do, they don't mention that. They don't tell the patient how dangerous these drugs actually are.
No, they don't.
I haven't ever seen a psychiatrist tell a patient how dangerous these drugs actually are with long-term use.
No, it doesn't surprise me at all. But I don't want to take you off track at all, but I'm intrigued how this number 23 has come up a number of times. And it's led me to that genetic company, 23andMe, which is derived from 23 pairs of chromosomes in our DNA, one set from each parent. I think this is related somehow. Psalm 23, 23 patterns. Maybe a subject for another episode. I'm going to dig into that, because if I see numbers popping up.
You were asking me how I learned about the 23rd Psalm. One of the patients at the state hospital came into me one day, and I was kind of following up with him, and he said, the voices don't like the 23rd Psalm. He said they react like worms thrown on a hot frying pan when I repeat the 23rd Psalm. So I went, well, isn't that interesting? So I started handing out the Psalm 23 to all the rest of the schizophrenics on my caseload and the new ones that were coming in. I said, here, take this and read it when you hear the voices, and then come back and tell me what happened. In almost every case, they hated it. They didn't like it. They didn't want me reading it. They would lose them,
Which is great to hear, a scientific version of that, because when I was very drawn to Psalm 23 as a kid. My first memory, as in this life, is demons coming to my room and trying to recruit me at 3 and 4 years old. And Psalm 23 was constantly in my life. And during COVID, it really came in, because I had to fight off demons so horrific in the last 4 years. There was one that was actually on my back. It was so heavy, I had to crawl up the stairs to get to the bedroom.
Wow.
And Psalm 23 did come back, and so did the Lord's Prayer, and
Psalm 91 also.
Yeah, I'd not heard that about Psalm 91. So that's just really, I'm reiterating these things for the viewers, because there will be people watching this going, which Psalm was it again, and everything else. And I will put links to Jerry's work and everything. Go and read his articles, go and look at more videos, and get his books from jerrymarzinsky.com. Excuse me, Jerry. So how long ago was that in your career that you got to that point where the guys in the prison were like, hey, pacing up and down and getting stressed about what you were doing? How long ago was that?
Oh, well, I worked, after that, I worked as a contractor, and then for 10 years, I was doing psych crisis in the hospital emergency rooms in all the hospitals around Tucson. So I'd say it's probably close to 20 years.
Okay. So at this point, Jerry's realized there's demons, they're real. You've had these experiences. When did you go public with this and start writing books and doing the other stuff that you've done?
Well, I got contacted by a fellow named Robert Stanley. So somehow he found out about what I was doing. I don't know how he did that, but he wanted me to speak on his TV program, on his podcast, and I said, that's fine, but you're going to have to make up a fake name for me. So he, I think he said Dr. J, and I wasn't thinking about it. I told him, I said, Robert, I'm not a doctor. You go, so what? and he went with it anyway. So here I am trying to, put out this brush fire he started, and it just went so ballistic that I gave up just telling people, now I'm not a doctor, not a doctor. I got a master's degree. I got 2 years toward a PhD, which were totally worthless as far as I'm concerned. But uh, yeah, and then
And then it just blew up, and then it just, well, it's like a train. Then you can't stop it, can you?
well, once I retired, I mean, so they were going after me at the prison for this,
yeah,
and they got one Spanish guy that I was working with, and he spilled the beans to them, and they're going, okay, this is weird, you're in trouble now, and I was just tired of dodging these people, so
yeah,
I was well within reach of retirement. So I bought some time back from the government, and I just told them I'm out of here. I'm done. So once I was out of there, and they no longer had a thumb on me, then I could start putting out stuff. But while I was working in the emergency rooms, I couldn't put out stuff there either.
no,
So I just went under Dr. J. But once I fully retired from working for anybody else and started my own practice, they don't have a thumb on me. They don't have a handle on me now. They
yeah,
can't do anything. I let my license lapse because I knew they would take it.
yeah,
They'd come and they'd drum up some bull crap and say, okay, we're removing your license because you're crazy or whatever they were going to do. But,
yeah.
I let it lapse, and it lapsed in good stead. So they can't even do that. So that they have no control over me now except to kill me or whatever they're going to do. But they're going to have to do that because they're not going to shut me up. This is
No.
too important for people to know.
Well, this is what I wanted to get to. So this is it's an amazing. By the way, when did you come out to your wife, and does she accept it now?
Well, she helped me. I never could talk to her about this kind of stuff, but she helped me edit this book that we wrote. Now, Sherry Sweeney was my co-author on this, An Amazing Journey Through the Psychotic Mind. This is a story of how we came to the conclusion that these things were entities.
Yeah.
Okay? And not just. So she never knew the full story of what I was dealing with until she read this book. And
Okay.
she had a hard time going through it because she translated it in Spanish for us.
Okay.
So it's now in Spanish, it's in French, it's in German, it's in English, and it's being translated into Russian right now. And all these people just came out of nowhere. They go, "Oh, we'd like to translate your book into Spanish or German." I'll do everything I can to help you.
That's fantastic.
It
But
just,
it is difficult, because when I first came out and started talking publicly about demons, it was on a podcast, and when the podcast was over, I literally slapped myself on the head, going, "I'm ruined."
mm,
My clients, because I had a business, will all just dump me because I obviously sound like a lunatic. But then what happened? I got thousands of emails from people all over the world saying same thing here. I've never told anybody either.
yeah, yeah. I get emails all the time. Thank you for talking about this. There's nobody else I could talk to about this.
Well, that
You
was the
know,
same with you back when you were going through it. Who could you talk to? I
no,
mean,
nobody.
did you ever think of going to a priest or anybody like that?
Now I
No.
knew what would happen. So what happened? Sherry Sweeney, the co-author of my book, I met her while I was working for the prison, and she was a prison reform person. So I ran into uh, her website, and I went, "Yeah, the prisons really need reform." I couldn't do it to my prison system because I worked for them, and they'd fire me. She was she was taking shots at the Alabama state prison system, which is even worse than that in Arizona.
Yeah.
And I went, I'm going to help you. I'll tell you how these people think. I'll tell you how to upset them. I'll tell you what to say to upset them. I'll tell you what to do to intimidate them. So I was working with her. She was taking on the uh, Alabama prison system, and we were working together in prison reform for 10 years. And one day I was telling her about one of the schizophrenics I was working with, just to have somebody to talk to because I knew she was aware of stuff like that in the prison. And she comes back and she says, "Oh, I know all about the voices." And she's one of the most spiritual people I know. And I said, what do you mean you know all about the voices? Oh, I heard them when I was a young girl. They almost killed me. And I'm like,
Yeah.
what?
Wow.
You know,
Yeah.
so I couldn't believe it. 10 years. It took her 10 years to tell me this, you know, and I didn't believe it. So I started hammering her with questions that only a person who heard the voices could answer. You know, it's like bam, 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 bam. And she's like boom, 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 one after another. She was there, you know. So after we got talking about this, it's like, well, we need to do something to get this out to the world,
Yeah.
you know. So we worked together 2 years. It took us to write this book. You know, so it was really interesting because she had actually been there, you know, and I had talked to literally hundreds of patients who had been there. So we would kind of bounce off of one another, you know. So you have both an inside perspective of somebody who had actually lived this and gone through it. Matter of fact, she came up with the That's a Lie program, which is of great use in weakening the voices, and sometime we'll get rid of them. And that's on my website also under jerrymarzinsky.com under articles. Look for the That's a Lie program, because these voices are persistent liars. They lie about everything.
Yeah.
You can't trust anything they say. All those lies are generated to upset you. That's a lie program. There it is right there. She's got 3 parts in detail written there. You know, anybody who's hearing voices and hearing this broadcast, go and get this program and put it to use right away. It's one of the most effective programs that you could have, and it's free on our website.
That's amazing. Yeah, I'm just pulling up that page. This one.
That's the one.
Fantastic. Yeah, so fascinating so far. I'm also interested to know how you found time to become a commercial pilot, because I was also a pilot, which is I thought was quite amusing.
Well, I was a sailplane pilot.
Yeah, I was first. That was the first thing I went solo with when I was 16.
Yeah, so I flew those for years, and then I went, well, I ought to become a flight instructor. But to become a flight instructor, you need to have a commercial license.
Yeah.
So that was like 2/3 as hard as getting the private license.
Yeah.
So I got a commercial pilot's license in sailplanes, gliders, high performance gliders.
Fantastic. Yeah. The last one I flew was an ASK-21. That must have been 30 years ago.
Yeah, it's been a while for me too.
Yeah, well, life takes over, children, and then COVID and podcasts, and it's quite hard. But my daughter's learning to fly at the moment.
Oh, good.
She's been flying since she was 14, so I still keep her hand in the whole field. But it's great to do that. I just think that's quite interesting, because I get the feeling, I don't know what you think to this. I have no idea what you're going to say to this, but I feel like you were divinely guided to this work. And you were chosen because of the way you are, and that's why you've managed to do such an amazing job. And I always find that really amusing, because somebody said that to me about what I was doing, and I was like, really? Me? I'm just an idiot. And then
yeah, I think you're right on with that, because it started early.
Yeah.
You know, my dad was abusive. He was like a rageaholic.
Which was demonic possession.
Yep, and he got misdiagnosed by the doctors. He had diabetes, and he didn't have any energy, so they started feeding him amphetamines.
Yeah.
So he started getting paranoid and crazy. So living with that, it was like it was like part of my life. I hated it, and I hated dealing with him and his rage and his outbursts. But what I learned was, I was too small to get back at him. But what I was able to do would be push him right to the verge of an explosion, till he was just boiling mad, and then back off before he exploded. And if I misjudged, the repercussions were horrible.
Well, I'm smiling. I'm smiling because that's like an analogy with like doing a stall in a sailplane, and not going into a spin. But it's also what I always, I had this conversation 2 nights ago with somebody who said, I'm never going to forgive them for what they've done. What are we supposed to do with them? You're talking about the people who've perpetrated a genocide attempt on the human race. And I said, well, we have to forgive them. And he got crazy with me. He was like, well, I can't forgive them. We've got to kill them. We've got to. I said, but the problem is that's making us just as bad as them. And most of these people that do these things, such as your father never wanted to be like that with you. He loved you. But the entities are very, well, I'm guessing. I mean,
Well,
you know,
you could have fooled me.
I'm making an assumption, but what I mean is the entities are so powerful that they deliberately try to destroy families and relationships and
Yeah.
put you off course. This is what they've done to everybody. And I've heard you say it earlier, or maybe I read it on your site, the guilt and shame then that comes, and then the sadness that comes with that, and the loneliness and the isolation that comes from that is exactly what they want, because that's
Yeah.
just, they're farmers, they're farming loosh.
Yes.
So why would they do anything else? And it's really interesting that they said, you have no right to interfere in our way of life. I think isn't that an interesting phrase?
Yeah.
For an energetic.
It took me back.
Yeah.
Yes. So I had that background of, so I was able to get more information out of the schizophrenics than most of my colleagues, because
Yeah.
I knew how far I could push them before they exploded.
You had the experience.
I had the experience.
It's
The
like,
other thing is, I'd meet with some of these criminally insane guys, and it was like, for me, it was like old home, old home week. It's like, okay, what else you got? You're flaming, you're crazy, you're blowing apart all over the place. You're threatening people. So what else is new? It's like, I was used to it.
yeah,
It was like you said. I think I was being prepared for it.
yeah, I think
And
so.
and growing up with my dad did more to foster a grave distrust for authority. Right. So even going into college, I remember one of the papers they assigned was a clinical psychologist in abnormal psychology. He wrote a paper saying, if two crazy people met each other and they both thought they were Justin Trudeau, one of them would have to give way and change his delusion into something else. And even as an undergraduate student, I'm going, well, they're both crazy. Why would one have to change? That doesn't make any sense to me at all. But here's a clinical psychologist writing this paper. I found out later that 80% of what psychologists publish is not replicable. 80%. That means it's garbage. 80% of what they write is garbage. And I found out later when I got up into the PhD program, they just publish anything just to get it published. It's like publish or perish is their
Well, this is what the Flexner report taught them all to do. It created that environment so that you have to be peer reviewed to be taken seriously, and anything that steps outside of that just gets destroyed. Hence,
but they're all in the same gang.
Yeah, they are. They're all in the. So this is what I want to ask you. You said about 10 minutes ago, the world needs to know about this, needs to understand. So I wrote down right at the beginning of this interview, what's the big picture that you've now seen through all of your life experiences that have taken you to this point? How do you see the solution to this? Obviously, with things like the course that we've just shown everybody, and reading books and educating and spreading the word. But what's the big picture as far as Jerry's concerned?
Well, one of the aspects of the big picture is, where do thoughts come from? They don't ask that question. Psychiatrists don't ask that question. Psychologists don't ask that question. Social workers don't ask that question. I mean, everything is mediated by thought. And we're just intuitively believe that every thought that comes into our mind belongs to us.
And it's a mental.
That's far from the truth. That's very far from the truth.
Absolutely. And it's a mental universe.
Yep. These entities are energetic.
Yeah.
They can enter your mind. They can pull up every rotten thing you ever done. They can point to it and say, see what a rotten SOB you are. Yep. Look at what you've done. Look at what you've said. Look at how you've hurt these people.
And they can come through people you love and say these things to you.
Yes.
That's the most powerful weapon I think they have.
Well, they will gang up on you too. So they can affect other people. Like you said, they want to rip apart families. They want to rip apart relationships. They want to isolate everybody. the worst thing you could do with a schizophrenic is lock them in a room and let them stay there, because then it's them and the voices.
Yeah.
There is no interference. The voices want no interference. They will treat anybody who tries to help the schizophrenic as an enemy.
6 feet apart. Don't
Yeah,
leave your house. Don't go anywhere.
Yeah, matter of fact, if you look at these patterns, okay, they're the exact same crap that's coming over the mainstream media all through the pandemic.
Yeah.
And even right now with the elections.
I know.
I mean, negativity, they're anti-religious, they foster and create negative emotion, they drain people, they get louder after sunset. I mean, it's the same stuff. You know, they foster self-destructive behavior, they foster isolation, they demand the attention of their victims. They maneuver for increased control over their victims. They gaslight, they manipulate perception. They have complete access to the schizophrenic's memory. You know, they demand not to be found out. You know, they're consistent liars. They can't keep any bargain. They steer the victim away from joy and happiness. They manipulate feeling without asking. They short circuit reason. It just goes on and on and on. It's
Yep.
the same crap that's coming over the television right now from all the BBC, ABC, NBC, CBS, you know, public radio. It's you look at it point by point by point.
Yep.
It's the same crap. It's these guys are demonically possessed.
Yes, they are. And I'll tell you a small anecdote. Although I had the demonic attacks as a child, I managed to shift away from it and kind of put it in a box and tried to put it down to a childhood memory. But my girlfriend, when I was about 18, but 10 years later, she committed suicide. And before she did, she'd been committed to a mental institution in England. And I called her while she was there. We were still friends. And I said, why are you there? And she said, because this is hell. And I was flippant. I said, well, you know, it's a bit rough sometimes. And then she went, no, this is actually hell. We're actually in hell. And then she committed suicide and let her mother find her after taking a load of
oh man,
sleeping tablets and vodka. And she'd been in her mother had been involved in a religious cult. The religious cult was started by a lay preacher, and that cult is the cult that the village that I grew up in. The cult grew up as I grew up in this village, and I found out later that the guy who started the cult also abused my dad when he was a choir boy at the church. And in the same way, I feel like that all of that prepared me for this time because of all the trauma and, and all the demonic interference and everything else. And I want everybody to understand that this is a spiritual war.
Yes.
But it's hard to get that across to people that haven't, you know, walked the walk or talked the talk. But the point is, the majority. I wanted to ask you this. In my experience, the majority of people, because I say something flippant, like everybody's been demonically possessed their whole lives, and they're like, "What? What are you talking about?" But most people don't know. They don't know because the voice in the head, they think is their voice.
Yes. Yeah. Matter of fact, Emanuel Swedenborg, a Christian mystic, lived 300 years ago, who had access to heaven and hell. He said that none of your thoughts belong to you. They either come in from heaven or they come in from hell. You are the decider as to which ones you want to pay attention to.
Yeah, I'm getting a vibration as you say that.
Yep. Just like the Indians, the Native Americans said, well, you've got two wolves one over each shoulder. You know, which one gets stronger is the one that you feed.
And what did we grow up on with the cartoons? There was always an angel on one side and the devil on the other.
That's exactly what's going on.
Exactly what's going on. They showed us.
So Swedenborg says every negative thought that goes through your mind is put there by the demonic side.
Yeah.
You know? And I thought for years that they sounded different somehow. Until one day I prayed, Lord, let me experience what these things are like. So I know. And I'm getting the chills every time I talk about this one. So you want me to tell that story? We got time?
Yes, please, because I was going to ask you this anyway.
Okay. So I prayed. I wanted to hear them because I wanted to experience what they sounded like. And the result absolutely shocked me. So it was like maybe 2 weeks after I said that prayer. Still working at the state hospital. I was living on a large lake, and at sunset, I would go out and I'd swim in the lake. I was a very strong swimmer. I was a certified scuba diver. I loved the water. I was at home in the water, and the motorboats would start disappearing off the lake at night, so I didn't have to worry about being hit.
Yeah.
So I started out in the lake. It was bathwater warm, and I just kept swimming. It was like a meditative type thing. I balanced out, my oxygen consumption with how much energy I was using. I was just cutting through the water, uh, and then after a while, I didn't even know how long. I started getting tired, and I went, I wonder where I am. So I look up, and I'm way out in the middle of the lake. I'm
Well,
far, far out. And I was too tired to make it back, if I tried to swim back again. So I wasn't worried about it in the very least because, I'd had all this water survival training and stuff in scuba classes in the university. I took skin and scuba diving in the university. It took a whole year. So I was very well trained. Wouldn't worry about it at all. So I look around and I said, well, I'm too tired to go back, swim back yet. And here comes this thought in my mind going, yeah, you're too tired to go back. And it's starting to get dark. And I look and it's starting to get dark, and then it says something about you're going to drown. And I'm like, where'd that come from?
hmm
It was the last thing on my mind. It didn't even cross my mind. And I knew it didn't come from me because
Yep.
I wasn't worried about it. So you go into what they call a survival float. You put your hands behind your back and take a deep breath, and you're just floating like a dead man on the water. Your back is out of the water, your face is down in the water. And when you need a breath, all you got to do is pull your head up, blow out that air that was there, and then suck in a new breath before you start sinking. Because as soon as you blow out the air, you start sinking.
Yeah.
Okay. So I did that. And I started sinking. You may sink down maybe 2, 3 feet, and then you bob back up again, and then you start floating till you run out of breath. On one of the times where I was going down, here's this thing saying you're too tired to go back to the shore. It's getting dark, and you're heading for the bottom. You're going to drown. And I'm going, this is weird,
Yeah.
And it was like I realized right then it was like a yes set, like salesmen use. You
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
it-
It's like an assumptive close.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So here's these truths that it's
Yeah.
spitting out. You're too tired to make it back. That was true. It's starting to get dark. That was true. You're sinking toward the bottom of the lake. That was true. Then here comes, and you're going to drown.
Yeah.
And I'm going, what? I realized it was a yes set, and I'm
Yeah.
going, where's that come from? It's not me. I'm not using a yes set against myself. And I recognized what it was, and I'm going, what is this thing? I knew it wasn't me.
Mhm.
So I'm going, well, whatever it is, I'm going to spite it. So the next time I take in a breath and I start sinking toward the bottom, and I let out air. I didn't come back up and bounce. I let out more air, and I started sinking deeper. And then you hit what you call a crush depth. And I was kind of weirded out by this whole thing. It felt really strange. It was really, I didn't know what was going on. Something was going on that I didn't understand, and
Yeah.
I was trying to spite it because it was telling me I was going to drown. I wasn't worried about drowning at all. So when I'm sinking, after I took the breath, I let out the air, you sink. I already had a full breath of air. I would have floated back up to the surface. Instead of doing that, I let air out and I started sinking. And I'm going, well, that's okay. I neutralized the air behind my ears. Uh, so it, balanced the air pressure on my ears, and I kept sinking. Then I started sinking really fast. So what happened? I hit the crush depth where the water pressure collapses your lungs and you're no longer buoyant. So at that point, I wouldn't have been able to float to the top anymore. I started sinking really fast, and I was kind of weirded out by how fast I was sinking. So I went, well, I better go up just to be safe. So I went up and took a breath, and here it comes again. Okay, it's getting dark. The lights are going on. The lights are going on at the shore. You're going to get disoriented. You're too far out to make it back safely, and you're panicking. because I came back up. It's going, you're panicking and you're going to drown. And I'm like, what the hell is this? So I go down again, catch my breath. I sink. I hit the crush depth, start sinking really fast. Next thing I know, I feel this ice cold feeling coming up my legs. I shot to the surface again. Even before I got there, I knew what it was. It was a thermocline. I've been through them a bunch of times scuba diving. It's a layer of cold water that usually lays on the bottom. It's heavier than the other water, and it just sinks.
Yeah.
So even before I got to the top, I knew what it was. Right? But I got up there, and it's like same thing again. You're too far out. You're too tired to make it back. It's starting to get dark. You're panicking. There's a motorboat coming right at you. And I'm like, what? I don't see any motorboat. Because you usually underwater, you can hear sound a long way off. I mean, if there's noise anywhere, you can hear it. And I didn't hear anything. I guess I was too concentrated on what was happening. And I look far off in the distance, and here's this motorboat, and it's kind of dusk. It's getting dark. Right? And here's this thing heading right toward me. And here's this thing in my head saying, they can't see you, which is true. And then it goes, and they're going to hit you, and they're going to grind you to pieces because they're heading right at you. And I look at it, and they're heading right for me. They're still a ways off. I wasn't worried about it because I had to, there's times where I had to dive under boats as they passed over. And I just went, well, I don't like doing it, but if I need to, I'll just go down until it passes over and I'll just stay there. So even though I didn't want to do that, I could have had I wanted to. So I wasn't worried about it. I was watching this motorboat, and it's coming pretty close to me. And then it goes by maybe 30 feet away or something like that. They didn't see me, just like whatever this thing said. And I watch it pass by, and I turn and I'm watching it go by. And then I go to turn around again, and I forgot about the wake. So I'm taking in a mouthful of air, and this wake washes over me. And I take in a mouthful of water, and I started coughing, spitting it up. So here it comes again. It's dark. You're getting late. The lights are going to go out on the shore. You're going to get disoriented. You're too tired to make it back. And you're panicking, and you're going to drown. And I spit up all the water, got my composure again, and went down again. So I'm sinking. I had no idea how deep this was out in the middle of the lake. I just kept sinking. Went through the thermocline so I could feel that cold air coming all the way up. And then it wasn't laying on the bottom like most of them did. It was maybe 10 feet above the bottom. So I went through the thermocline, and it was warm water again. And I was surprised, because I'd never run into that before. It was always on the bottom. So finally, I felt this ooky something crawling up my leg. And I'm like, what the fuck? I shot for the surface again. Even before I got there, I knew I had hit the bottom. But I was expecting rock, because it was rock as far out from the shore where I lived as I could ever get. So I thought it was rock all over the bottom of the lake. It wasn't. This was muck. So I hit the surface again, and here it is again. You're too far. The lights are starting to go out. You're panicking. You're going to drown. I'm like, what the frick is this thing? So I went all the way back down again. My feet stuck in the mud, and I just flipped over like a dead man. So I was just hanging above the bottom. My arms were, my hands were maybe a foot above the bottom of the muck. And it was just complete silence. The water was bath warm. So it was one of the most amazing experiences I had. All my physical senses were cut off, all of them. I couldn't see anything. I couldn't hear anything. I was too afraid, so I wasn't thinking anything. I was waiting for something to come out of the dark at the bottom of the lake and grab me. So my attention was just around whatever, looking for something. All my senses were shut off, and it was like, I remember the thought, what was it? It was like, this is what's there when all the senses are shut down. It was like just I'm aware that I was aware. And
Yeah.
that's what's there. You shut down all the garbage, all the physical stuff coming in. And that's what's there is just that awareness, that consciousness, that conscious awareness. Swam to the top, went, that was very interesting. But the thing never came back. But what was so interesting about it, it didn't sound like we're the voices, we're going to get you. It sounded just like my own thoughts. It sounded just like the thousands of thoughts I have run through my mind every day. But
Yeah.
the content and the intent was very different. So that's where they get you. If you believe that those negative thoughts belong to you and that they are you, which is what these things want, then they got you. And I've talked to scores of schizophrenics in the prison and the hospitals who have asked these voices, "Who are you? What are you?" And their response was, "We are you.
Hmm.
We are you." They want you to believe that they are them, and
Yeah.
if you believe that, they got you.
Yep. 100%.
Does that answer your question?
It has. Yeah. Has all this experience brought you closer to God over the years?
Oh man, I tell you,
I think
I
I know
was
the
never
answer.
I was never real religious.
Me neither.
It was I believed in God. It was like, but there was no real sense, of that. Um, but it's when I started reading Swedenborg, I really started getting into, what's really going on here. And I kind of came at it from the opposite end. It's like, okay, if there's these negative, awful entities, this is a dualistic universe. There's hot, there's cold, there's dark, there's light, there's good, there's bad. It's a dualistic universe. And if there's these entities are out there feeding on people, well, there must be a God also. So it was at that point where I really started looking for God. And it was Emanuel Swedenborg who really woke me up to how he actually works here.
This guy.
That guy. He had access to heaven and hell. He was one of the top scientists of his day. He was a psychic. He was the chief mining engineer for the Queen of Sweden. He knew stuff that other people didn't know. And then at the age of 50, Jesus came to him and said, okay, stop all this academic stuff. And he spent his whole life as an academic, highly trained. He went all over Europe, got all these degrees. And Jesus said, I'm going to give you access to heaven and hell. I want you to go there and interview the entities who are living there. And then, yeah, that's a good show. If you want to get an introduction to Swedenborg in Life by Curtis, he has.
This is brilliant. I've never heard of him.
Oh boy, he's incredible.
Wow. Okay, I've got some homework. Thank you.
So he's got hundreds of videos on the teachings of Swedenborg. Yeah. So part of the way I came to this is there was a clinical psychologist who was a Swedenborgian in Northern California, working at a state hospital up there. Okay. I read his books, and then when I had those experiences with the crackling in my office and that kind of stuff, I went, I need to find this guy. His name was Wilson Van Dusen. He had already written books about these things. And he took a different approach than I did. He was trying to make friends with them, to learn about them. So he would have long conversations with them. He didn't learn very much about them because they constantly lied to them.
Yeah.
I, on the other hand, always treated them as enemies and was looking at ways to destroy them, to get them out of the way. So
we've got that in common.
When you put them against the wall like that, you really see what they're capable of doing. And I had prisoners tell me all these amazing stories, especially the amphetamine addicts. when they ran out of amphetamine, the voices would tell them where to go, where to be, and when to be there to get more amphetamine. And they would show up at that place, and somebody with amphetamine would show up. Had another guy where the voices would tell him which houses to rob, how to get in, basically where the loot was, if the occupants of the house were awake or not, and when to get out.
Wow.
Okay? So he's to tell me all these stories about the voices and telling him that. And I went, well, you're in prison. How'd that work for you? I said, well, how come you're here? He said, oh, I got greedy. There was this one rich mansion. I wanted to get in there, and I really wanted to get in there bad. I knew they had good stuff in there. The voices told me not to go there. That's where I got caught.
Wow.
So one day they were telling him, hey, the house owner's up. You better get out of here. So he listened to them. He jumped out the window. He was about to run up this alley on his left side. The voices said, no, don't go there. The police are coming up that alley. Go to the right. So he went to the right. He saw this big trash bin. The voices told him, go hide in that trash bin until the police pass. So the police walked right by with a flashlight, looking for who was there. Didn't think to look in the trash bin. And then the voices told him, okay, now get up and get out. Close the lid quietly. He goes, no, they're just right there. They're 10 feet away. No, I better stay here. And the voices said, no, don't do it. Get out now. So he got out, closed the bin quietly, and then ran to his apartment. And then the voices are telling him, good job. Good job. And he goes, well, not good job. I left all the loot in the trash bin. Voices said, no problem. You go there tomorrow morning, pick it up. The weirdest one.
Wow.
Was a fellow I was working with, and he got rid of the voices while I was working with him in the prison. Now, one thing weird happened when they got rid of the voices at the prison. 3 o'clock in the morning the next day, I would be attacked. 3 in the morning, I would be crushed down into the bed.
3 a.m. Yeah,
3 a.m. And every time, the first couple of times that happened, I was terrified. I just started praying my butt off.
Yeah.
And it eventually let up, but I could feel it. It was like something heavy was actually pushing me down into the bed.
Yeah.
And that happened every time one of these guys got free. 3 in the morning until I started getting used to it. But this other fella, he was in San Diego. The voices told him. Now he recovered at the time he told me this story, so he wasn't under the influence of the voices when he told me this story. He was a career criminal, had a rap sheet pages long. He was psychotic. He was hearing voices. He'd been using drugs. He'd gotten into trouble with the police a million times. We were working on the voices. They finally went away, and he told me this after they went away. He said one day he was in San Diego. He was using drugs, and the voices said, we know where there's a Sesamelia pot field in Oregon. So Oregon was maybe 1,500 miles away from where he was in San Diego. They told him, go get 2 burlap bags, get a machete, take your savings, and we'll show you where this pot field is. So he trusted him completely. Here he started driving up toward Oregon, taking turn by turn, listening to what the voices were telling him. He got up to Oregon, got on this dirt road that went into the mountains, and he's following step by step what the voices are telling him. He ran out of dirt road. He said, there's nowhere else to go. What do I do now? The voices said, there's a hiking trail up to your left. Okay? Take that hiking trail, bring your machete and your bags. Right? So he did that, and he walked up that hiking trail for a couple hours, and he came up on this giant Sesamelia pot field, just like the voices said. Right? He got his bags. He filled up the bags with the marijuana, and he goes to the voices. He goes, what do I do now? And they said, we know a park where you can sell them. So there was a federal park near there on the Columbia River. So he took his marijuana, he started selling it. He made a lot of money, and he bought all the prostitutes he could handle. He bought all the drugs he could handle, all the alcohol he could handle. And this weirded me out. He said the voices were fishermen. They wanted to go fishing. And at that point, I'm like, oh, you're pulling my leg. That's too much. And he goes, no, honest to God. They wanted to go fishing. He said, so I went and bought a fishing rod and, got drunk and drugged up and went down to the Columbia River, and I was fishing, and the voices would tell me where to throw the hook, when to move it, and where to move to go somewhere else where there's fish. And he said he was the only one catching fish on the river that day. Right?
Wow.
So he did that for about 2 weeks. He ran out of. He went up there one more time to get more marijuana, and then here he is buying all the prostitutes, the alcohol, the drugs that he wanted, having the life of Riley. He thought that was great, but all that stuff was destroying him.
Yeah.
It was slowly destroying him. So the third time he ran out and he said, I need to go back up there and get some more marijuana and sell it. And the voices said, no, if you go up there, they're going to kill you. They're waiting on you. They know you've been stealing their crop. If you go up there again, they're going to kill you. So the voices told him, you just get the money you have now, and drive back down to San Diego and go back down there. And he did. And he swore to me, he said, that's what happened. And he was completely straight when he told me this story.
Have you put all of these stories into a book?
I was going to, but after writing this last one, I was like, oh my God, I can't write another book. It's going to kill me.
Well, you got
See all this stuff behind me. It's all full of these stories.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, you've got all the way through this chat. I just keep seeing a movie. It's a movie. We've got to do a movie.
I'd be glad to do it for that, but it's like, I got a full clinical practice now, and I'm like, oh my Lord.
Well, you're working too hard because demand has gone up for what you're doing, presumably.
Well, there's a new energetic psychotherapy out there that showed up, and it's the only psychotherapy that I've ever seen work in all the years I've been on the front line. It's called the Mace Energy Method.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that because I read about it on your website earlier. What is it?
Well, it's an energetic. So we're energy. Our spirit is energy. Our thoughts are energy. Our memories energy. Our feelings are energy. Your spirit's energy. It's all energy, And here's psychiatry using physical drugs, trying to treat an energetic process. So, using those drugs is like pouring. Like I said, it's like pouring Thorazine on a magnetic field. It doesn't get rid of these energetic beings. It doesn't get rid of the negative identities that you form. So what happens? There's two things I'm seeing that affect people. One are these entities. I mean, they're energetic entities. They're demons. Now they're also good entities. They're angels, just like they say, but they don't usually talk in words. They usually talk in feelings and intuition.
Yeah.
They'll talk in words if you're on the verge of death. They might tell you, don't get on that plane, or, don't get in the car, don't go anywhere right now. But usually it's feeling and intuition, where they're kind of silently, quietly speaking to. It's that quiet voice within. With these negative ones, they'll just boom into your head, tell you, do this, do that, da 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 da.
Yeah.
Where was I going with that?
You're explaining the Mace Energy Method.
Oh yeah. So the second part is what Mace called the negative identity. He said regular psychotherapy doesn't work because they don't take identities into account. So there's two kinds of identities. There's positive identities, which are identities you've created yourself. So you've created an identity yourself as a podcaster, as a car driver, as whatever else. I mean, and that positive identity, when you get in your car, you don't have to think about all the stuff you need to do to drive that car. Your driver identity takes over, and you're thinking about something else, and your body's just driving that car. If something comes up, then you put full attention on driving the car. But otherwise, you're on autopilot. You'll just go wherever you're going. That's a positive identity. It helps you survive on the planet. Negative identities are very different. They're created unconsciously by a trauma. And then they're buried in the subconscious mind. So what happens during a trauma is you get this awful feeling as a result of the trauma. And it just don't go away.
Yeah.
So what happens is you make a decision during that trauma as to how you relate to that trauma. And those decisions are seldom positive because you don't make good decisions when you're in a traumatic state. So you might have went, well, this happened to me because I'm not good enough, or I'm too stupid, or something like that. So what happens is you got that negative thinking buried there. You got that negative identity. This happened to me because of this awful thing, and it just won't go away. So the ego shows up and goes, let me handle this. And it takes it and it buries it in the subconscious mind. And then it locks it down so it can't get out. Right? It's still alive,
Yeah.
but it's buried. You're not now aware of it. So what it is like a feeling now. It's just this feeling that I'm not good enough or that I'm stupid. It's not, this thought that is constantly coming up. I'm stupid. I'm stupid. It's more a feeling. I'm not good enough. Okay. So that's like a computer virus in a computer. It's running in the back of your mind all the time, but you're not aware of it. And what it feels like is if somebody traumatizes you when you're a kid, and somebody, years later, somebody who shows up who's like that person who traumatized you, this buried junk goes off. It triggers, and it goes, you might not even, that guy doesn't even have to open his mouth. You just know you don't like him.
Yeah.
That's that thing going off. So what happens is all that garbage is projected onto that person, and then the ego says, oh, get rid of them. They're causing that bad feeling in you. Look, you see them, they're right there in front of you. They're causing that bad feeling, and they're even acting like, you're not even aware they're acting like this guy that you buried, 20 years ago or 30 years ago. So it triggers a fight or flight response. The ego tells you either fight them or run from them or avoid them. Okay. So that's what's happening every time one of these guys show up, or it shows up in another way and it's still unconscious. It's like you get into a mess and you go, I'm never going to get into this mess again. You've already been in that mess 2 or 3 times before, and you go, I'm not going to get in this mess again. I'm not going to let it happen again. 6 months later, you're right there again.
Yeah.
And this is common with women who marry alcoholics.
Yeah.
They get divorced from 2 alcoholics and they go, I'm never going to marry another alcoholic again. They find this nice guy. He's not drinking. He seems like he's decent. 6 months into the marriage, he starts drinking. He drinks heavier and heavier. He starts showing he's an alcoholic, and there he is again. So it's this subconscious program running in the back of their minds. And there's all kinds of subconscious programs, all put there during traumas. So the problem John Mace had, now Mace was a ship captain. He was a master mariner, and he was always fascinated with how the mind worked and how to find a cure for psychological problems. Now I think he had a master's in counseling, but he was never a psychologist or a psychiatrist or anything like that. Right? He found that the mind is not what the establishment says it is. The mind only takes pictures of where you put your attention. He says the spirit does everything else. It's a spirit who thinks. It's a spirit who perceives. It's a spirit who feels. Everything that was attributed to the mind actually is the province of the spirit. So he found if you can locate that negative identity, which took him years to figure out how to do that. Where does the ego bury that negative identity in the subconscious mind? Could be anywhere in there. How do you find it?
Mm-hmm.
He turned that over to the province of the spirit based on as far as science could take him. So being a ship captain, he had to be aware of how magnetism worked, how electricity worked, how it flowed, how the fields, the magnetic fields, all this kind of. The guy was brilliant. So he saw that energy flows from negative to positive. All right.
Yeah.
So these negative identities were negative. He found that if you could turn that negative identity into a picture, okay, then you could connect it with the attention to the spirit, and the spirit would drain it. So he saw that energy flowed from negative to positive. And that's what happens with these negative identities. They're a body of negative energy that have their own identity, that are programmed into our minds, and they're running like a computer program in the background. So what he found is they operate just like a car battery. You get a brand new car battery, you charge it up full, you drain it down till there's nothing left. You can't recharge that battery again. It will not charge up. He found that negative identities work the same way. And once you discharge them, or you make that link with the spirit through your attention to discharge that negative identity,
Gone.
once you drain it all the way down, it's gone. Now, the person doesn't forget that they had that horrible experience. They still remember it, but there's no emotional charge to it. I ask them, well, how do you feel about it now? I don't feel anything. I remember it, but it doesn't bother me anymore.
That's fantastic.
So this is cutting edge stuff. It actually works. I've seen it work with alcoholism. I didn't believe it would do that. People, and what really bothers me is here's these people that are, like 70, 80 years old, have been carrying around this negative identity. And one of the most common ones is I'm not good enough.
Oh yeah, I know. I hear it all the time.
Yeah. And here's this negative identity telling them not good enough. And within an hour, it's gone, totally gone.
So you do sessions of this?
Yes. That's what I work with now, only because it's the only thing I've seen that actually works. I've done all kinds of psychotherapy. I went to all kinds of training for everything you can imagine. This is the only thing I've ever seen actually work.
Can I book a session?
Sure. I'll give you one.
Oh no, I want to do it because this just sounds too interesting not to do. And I know I've been undoing negative stuff my whole life, and I never feel like I've got all the way there. But if you're saying that this is like the best thing, I'm in.
Oh, I'd be glad to give you a free session.
Well, no, I always pay.
No.
I appreciate that, but make sure just email me some dates. That'd be great because we're coming up to 2 hours, and I wanted to and if you guys watching this, you're not allowed to book until I've had a go with Jerry. Okay?
Yeah, that's how you verify it for them.
Well, my guys are going to book you up now for the next 3 months, and I'm going to be like, oh, damn.
It's almost magic. And the other thing that's interesting about it is I don't need to know what that trauma was.
Well, that's even better.
I don't have to know anything about it. So these women who've been sexually molested or went through horrible experience, they don't have to bring it all up again. Or men, they don't have to bring all that up again. All I need to know is where it happened and how they felt about it. They don't need to grind through all the stuff again.
Well, that's good because that's hard for people, definitely. No, I wanted to wrap this up, if I can, Jerry, with I'm hoping an optimistic view about the future from here on, because you agree we're in a spiritual war.
Yes.
You understand the entities better than most people in the world, and I don't know about you, but I call myself an apocalyptimist because I just know it's going to be good. It's just that we've got quite a lot of crap to go through as humanity. Where do you stand on all of that with everything, all your experiences and where you are? You seem quite optimistic, but you never know. So,
well, I think God balances things out. He keeps, you look at how the universe runs. You look at how everything that's going around you, how a tree works, how, your body works. Everything is balanced out. And right now, it's not balanced.
yeah.
The world is in a very negative, dangerous place right now. We're on the verge of nuclear war. These morons have taken over the Western countries. These psychotic morons, like Biden, Obama, Trudeau, Macron. They're all. You look at these patterns that the psychotic voices run. They fit the bill exactly.
Well, they're possessed, right?
I believe they are.
Yeah.
They don't care about anything except their own power.
Yeah.
That's it.
So, but are we going to win this?
Well, I think at some point it's got to turn around.
Mm-hmm.
And I think this looks like it may be the point. Because you got good and facing evil right here in the U.S. They've already started cheating on the elections.
Oh, we know.
They've already started in Pennsylvania. They got caught, and they're doing it anyway.
Yeah,
they're burning ballot boxes. So they go out to Republican counties and they pour gasoline in the ballot boxes and burn the ballots. They've already started cheating. These people are evil.
Yeah.
And lies. I mean, they lie through their nose. You can't believe anything they say. They're just like the psychotic voices.
Exactly.
They're lying. They're duplistic. You can't trust them. They're dangerous. They're harmful.
But they're now being seen, which is the interesting thing, because all the way through this conversation, we talked about how they were desperate to be unseen, but it's like they're being flushed to the surface, and we're
Yes.
seeing behavior on a global scale on the TV. It's there.
Yeah, they're getting desperate now.
Yeah.
They're not even trying to hide it now because the jig's up. You know, they've been exposed. You know, and Trump has gone a long way in exposing them also.
A gargantuan effort.
Along with a lot of other people. Yeah, they're trying to kill him. I think he's had a number of suicide, or not suicide. They want to. That'd be great if they could pull that off. But I think he's destined to make it. Now, what I'm hearing is stuff like the CIA is really nervous about this. You know, and one CIA whistleblower said, "Well, if he gets in, they're going to declare martial law."
Yeah.
I've heard about cyber attacks.
Yeah.
So they're not going to take this lying down. They're not just going to go, okay, Trump won. They're going to do something, and it's not going to be good.
No, but it's all going towards the objective of. I wrote another book called God Wins, by the way.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Yeah, just to show you that don't ask me how I know. I just know it's going to be good.
Yeah. Well, I'm of the same opinion. God will win.
Yeah. Well, that's great, and I appreciate your time today on a Sunday. Thank you. So been great.
You're more than welcome.
It's been fantastic. Listen, I'd like to send you one of these as well if you want one.
Oh yeah, you bet. I could use that.
Okay, send me your address.
I'll tell you what. Let me sum up with a report card on the medical mafia, the psychiatric mafia right now. In the United States, last year, almost 50,000 people killed themselves. Suicide. Yeah. This has been going on year after year after year after year. We got more psychiatrists, more psychologists, more social workers, and more psychiatric meds on the planet now than ever before. And the suicide rate is growing. And a lot of these people are already on antidepressant drugs. You know, between 1999 and 2019, there was a 33% increase in the suicide rate. You know, and even these psychiatrists, the high priest of Western mental health, have a suicide rate 3 to 5 times percent higher than most other doctors. Okay? So here's the high priest of mental health suiciding at the same rate as schizophrenics, their most disturbed clinical population. This is their report card. People are not getting any better. They're getting worse. And this bullcrap they have with their medications that, oh yeah, this is the only treatment. Those medications don't cure anything. Nothing.
No.
So I got a lot more information on my website at jerrymarzinsky.com. Any of you guys who are hearing voices, go get that That's a Lie program. It works. It may not get rid of the voices, but it will weaken them. In some cases, it will even get rid of them if you use it consistently. Because if you don't believe what these liars are saying, they can't get their grips in you.
I think that's how I've done it. I knew that they were lying, and I was like, well, you're lying. And then they got more intense and more intense, and then I had to learn other things to get rid of them. And pretty much now they have very little sway over me. I'm not saying they've completely succeeded, but you know, it's because it's an ongoing journey learning this, and they have different techniques, and and it's like you said about an hour ago, the quiet voices, the medium voices, and the strong voices. It's like levels of demons that come in, and they've been trying to kill me my whole life, but we're still here.
Yep. Well, they've been doing the same to me. I should have been dead about 10 times over right now. Something miraculous always came and kind of got me out of it.
Well, that's a beautiful way to end this chat. Thank you very much, Jerry Marzinsky. Everybody watching, go to Jerry's website. But remember, I'm going first.
Okay, we'll set you up an appointment.
Okay. Cheers, Jerry. Thank you very much for that chat. Okay.